This week on Earth Radio, I spoke with Dr. Oliver Selmoni, a spatial geneticist from the University of Zurich, about how coral reefs are responding to climate change. This week on Earth Radio, I spoke with Dr. Oliver Selmoni, a spatial geneticist from the University of Zurich, about how coral reefs are responding to climate change. In late 2025, the Global Tipping Points report showed that ocean temperatures have crossed a critical threshold for coral reefs. The heat stress has caused huge swaths of gorgeous, colorful coral reefs, overflowing with marine life, to become bleached ghost towns. Dr. Selmoni's study of coral's genome shows that many reefs have the ability to adapt to heat stress. Today, we will find out what that might mean for the future of these ecosystems. Dr. Oliver Selmoni first became fascinated with coral reefs after working with an NGO in Thailand.
I had no idea about anything about coral reef until I went there. And then I found out, I spent basically 2 months diving every day on the reef, and I discovered a new world that was just under the surface that I have no idea that it existed. And when I came back to Switzerland to start my PhD, I proposed my supervisor to focus on coral reef for my research, and I was super lucky because he said yes, and that's how it all started.
Dr. Selmoni said that the most important thing to understand about coral is that it isn't a rock or a plant, but an animal.
So what we see when we look at a reef is the skeleton of these animals, and it's the skeleton that they build over time, and this skeleton is what creates the reef ecosystem. The way coral manage to live or survive in shallow water of the tropics is through these associations that they have with some algae that live inside the corals. They're kind of like photovoltaic panels of the corals. They take the energy from the sun and they provide food to the coral. So they feed the coral, and they allow the corals to maintain themselves, and the corals, thanks to the energies that they get from the algae, are then able to build these fantastic and beautiful three-dimensional structure that are the scaffold of the reef ecosystem.
Coral reefs are home to a quarter of all life in the ocean, despite taking up a small sliver of the seafloor. Coral reefs play a huge role in aquatic ecosystems and the health of shorelines.
Life is only possible at certain places where life can aggregate. So we have to see the ocean in the tropics as deserts, and coral reef are the oases of this desert where life aggregates. And over time, with their weight, they will just destroy this three-dimensional structure, and this will pose a threat to all the species that used to live on this structure. We'll have to find new places where to live, where to hide, where to hunt, where to nurse, for example. Coral reef are also barriers that mitigate the impact of waves and storms on the coastline. So they are important for that because they are physical barriers that prevent the erosion of the coastlines in the tropics.
Using satellite imagery, Selmoni and his colleagues were able to compare the heat stress that different coral reefs have been exposed to. They found that reefs that have been routinely exposed to heat waves have adapted to withstand those temperature differences.
And but animals also have a genome, and like any other animal that is exposed to environmental change, if they have sufficient genetic variation in their genome, they might be able to cope with this climatic variation. So what we were interested into, what I've been interested into over the past almost 10 years now, is trying to understand why there are some corals that manage to persist in waters or at reefs that have been exposed to recurrent heat stress over the past decades. Because we have seen that there are different regions of the world where, despite the fact that there have been already heat waves already maybe 20 or 15 years ago, the reef is still, or it's got back to a relatively good shape, and the corals there seems to be more resistant or resilient to new heat waves that arrive. And we think that one of the reasons why corals kind of have this memory of what happened in the past is because thermally tolerant corals have been selected maybe 20 or 15 years ago at these reefs. And so if we can understand what are the genetic characteristics that underpin this tolerance, maybe we can make better prediction at global scale of which reefs are more or less at danger of decline.
This sounds like great news. Coral can adapt to heat. Does that mean it can continue to fight through climate change? Well, it's not that simple. Just because coral was able to adapt to the heat waves of the last few decades doesn't necessarily mean it is set for life. A diverse coral reef will be able to make it through extreme heat through the process of natural selection. Coral with heat adaptive genes will survive and reproduce. But this will make the coral less diverse. Losing this diversity means that as coral face even hotter temperatures, they may not be able to adapt again. Without genetic diversity, these creatures don't have many opportunities to change.
I think it's a good sign, but it's not like a silver bullet for what's happening with climate change. So having this adaptation, I think, can buy us some time, in the meaning that corals probably have the potential to adapt to some extent. In the last paper, in the last study that we ran across different coral populations around the world, we saw that there is a potential for corals to cope with heat stress for the next 10 years maybe. This adaptation is not just going to be let corals are remain in the same state as they are now. So every time there is natural selection happening, populations become smaller and only the few individuals with the good genes manage to persist and propagate the reef. So the reef or corals can survive, but the reef in the way human know it and the way human use the reef, this kind of reef is probably going to be in a bad shape for a few years or for a few decades, and that's what's more worrying. And the second aspect that is important is that we are studying the genetic adaptation of corals to heat waves that have happened over the past 20 years. And we expect that maybe for the next 10 years, we are still going to be in an order of magnitude that is comparable to what we have experienced. But after 2035 or 2040, the magnitude of the heat wave is something we have never seen in the past. So we have no idea if these genes will be sufficient to cope with that unprecedented heat. Going beyond this tipping point, and it's the first time that we can observe this basically in 20 years in a single, in the lifetime of a generation of scientists, we're going to see the effect of climate change on a major ecosystem. And this is terrible, and it's also an opportunity scientifically to understand how bad can climate change be for biodiversity.
Dr. Selmoni can't say for sure what will happen to coral reefs in the future, but he doesn't believe that coral can survive on their own. If we don't slow the rate of climate change, the vibrant ecosystems under the water's surface might not survive.
The solution, I think, is just to support environmental policies and support the cuts in the emission of carbon. So everyone can do a little at their own scale by try to eat local food, try to reduce unnecessary use of cars and anything that pollutes. But of course, in democratic countries especially, try to support parties that that push for a green transition, because without cutting carbon emission, there is no technological solution that can overcome just the size of the problem that we have for corals, like any other ecosystem, cannot be solved with a new technology. It can only be solved by reducing emission and try to contain the increase in water temperature and the warming of the planet. I personally think that corals have the possibility to survive, and of course, this study is just about one particular genus of coral, right? And there are different species, like there are different trees in a forest. So I can only talk about this particular genus that we studied, and then of course I expect that other species will also show similar adaptive potential, but what I think is kind of evident and undeniable is that reefs in 20 or probably 30 years already will look very different from the ones we have today, probably much less diverse in terms of the amount of species, and even inside the species the genetic diversity will have become probably much smaller, because only the few corals genotypes that manage to survive its stress will propagate. And so that's probably another problem that is going to be introduced in the future, is that corals are going to be genetically eroded compared to what they are today.
Thank you to Dr. Selmoni for being on this week's episode of Earth Radio. This episode was reported and edited by Rebekah Hendricks. To get more climate news, check out the articles on earth.org. Our environmental coverage is supported by listeners and readers like you. For more information about how to donate, go to earth.org and have a great week.